Welcome to our final panel of the 10-day conference, The Meat and Dairy Industry, How the Animal Food System Imposes $414 billion yearly of externalized costs on taxpayers, animals, and the environment. And we have Melanie Warner, author of Pandora's Lunchbox, David Simon, author of Meatonomics, and Will Tuttle, author of The World Peace Diet. And throughout this conference, one of the themes has been that for health purposes, it's recommended that people eat a plant-based diet. Another theme is that the plant-based diet is very good for the environment and all the environmental issues. And a third theme has been that a plant-based diet is beneficial, very beneficial, for the treatment of animals. And those are the three themes. If you say to someone, why do you eat a vegan diet? Why do you eat a plant-based diet? Why are you vegetarian? It's environment, health, and the environment. Now, this panel is saying something even further. It's saying this actually, when you don't eat a plant-based diet, it's when someone eats a hamburger or eats a non-plant-based diet, they're actually imposing costs on you. So even if you don't care at all about food, you don't care about the environment, you don't care about health, you don't care about animals, a lot of people still don't like to pay taxes. So this is a panel to start out with saying that every time someone eats animal products, it's a tax on you that you have to pay. It costs you money. So with that being the theme, would you guys like to give your general thoughts and your thoughts on that?
Sure. If anybody saw my talk earlier today, I used this example, and I'll use it again to explain the concept. If I take my garbage to the front of my driveway and I leave it there and I pay somebody to pick it up, I internalize my garbage collection costs. On the other hand, if I take my garbage and I throw it in a park, I externalize my garbage collection costs. That is to say, I force somebody else to pay to pick up my garbage. And we typically say that it's appropriate for us to internalize our costs, and it's inappropriate for us to externalize our costs. So many commentators over the years have expressed the view that many different industries, not just the animal foods industry, but many industries, oil and gas production, energy production, the tobacco industry, externalize their costs. So this is not a new phenomenon, nor is it new to say this about animal foods. And many people have proposed different numbers for the animal food industry. So I've got a book that proposes some numbers, and other people have different views. So certainly different people on this panel might even have different views as to how the animal food industry externalizes costs. But I don't think that there is any debate that it does. One of the points that I make in my book is that this industry externalizes more of its costs than any other industry in this country. More than oil and gas production, more than energy and electricity production, more than the tobacco industry. This is the country's single leading industry when it comes to externalizing costs and imposing those costs on the rest of us. I calculate the figure at $414 billion, which is about half of what we spend on Social Security in this country each year, or it's about 1/4 of Canada's gross domestic product. So it's a very large number.
Thanks, David. I wonder how you can put a cost on a lot of the costs, but in the research I did on for the World Peace Diet, it was really shocking to see how many different subsidies go to the meat, dairy, and egg industries in many different forms. There's various numbers that are thrown around that a hamburger should cost $35 or who knows what if the industries really had to pay the going rate. For example, grazing allotments where they can graze their cattle on BLM land for just pennies per head, just virtually for free. and where we pay for governmental agencies like the BLM and the USDA, Department of Wildlife Services, and other agencies with taxpayer funds to kill millions of animals and to destroy basically our public lands in order to profit private interest, in order to profit large-scale ranchers and farmers. And there's huge, irrigation systems that have been put in place at taxpayer expense that basically deliver water virtually free, which would again cost them millions of dollars if they had to pay for it. And there's price supports, there's public school lunches where, all the excess production of the dairy industry, or a lot of it, just gets dumped into public schools and into other countries. And they're forced to eat the stuff, and we, the taxpayer, pick up the tab on a lot of that. So there's a never-ending array of those kinds of things. But I think beyond that, really, in many ways, I think it was kind of in your question, Steve, that the health costs, the fact that when people eat meat, dairy products, and eggs, they're going to be much sicker, and that's going to also, we all have to pay for that. The United States is kind of, I think, world famous, not just world famous, I think we're probably famous throughout most of the galaxies in the universe for having an incredibly expensive healthcare system that does not deliver a lot of healthcare, actually. I mean, it delivers a lot of expense and pharmaceutical drugs and procedures of various kinds, but it's very expensive and we don't have a lot of health to show for that. And there's many reasons for that, but I think underlying this whole thing is that there are large financial institutions that are making huge profits, and that we, the people, and animals, and future generations, and ecosystems are really paying dearly. And I don't see how you can put a price really on any of this. I mean, how can you put a price on someone who's undergoing chemotherapy, who has cancer from eating meat that has residues, lots of toxic pesticides that end up in dairy products, and so forth. The suffering that people endure, the suffering that animals endure, the devastation of ecosystems, it's hard to quantify that. And I've seen actually studies. I remember when I was getting my PhD at Berkeley, and I took some courses in quantitative and qualitative research analysis, and it's very interesting to see how some studies have tried to put a value on a human life. And one of the ways that they did that was they basically cooked a human body, determined that there was like $2.95 worth of minerals, so that's what it's worth. That's how you quantify a human life, $2.95. I mean, how do we quantify, how do we put a dollar figure on any of these? How do we put a dollar figure on being able to swim in clean water versus the fact that we can't do that anymore, or be able to breathe, live our lives breathing air that's enjoyable to breathe. The loss of the quality of life, I think, is enormous. And as I've said, I haven't been to a doctor in 40 years, or to a drugstore or anything else. And so this whole gigantic establishment is not making money off. I mean, I think in general, when we live our lives, we have to just question, we have to live our lives so that we're not allowing them to externalize costs as much as we can through our choices, and then really try to do education and pass laws. Because if people had to pay really what these foods would actually cost, then we would see a huge decrease in the amount of meat and dairy products and eggs that are actually being sold, because it would just, show how much it really should be. We should be paying. So these are public policy questions that I think we can all lobby on and do the research, and we have to have alternative ways of discussing these things like we have here, because the mass media, has been really bought and paid for by these same corporations, and so we don't hear this. We just don't have a chance to hear these kinds of things. But luckily, we have people like Steve and all you folks that are essentially doing what we can to, in a grassroots way, bring some kind of sanity to this situation. But it has very deep roots. It goes back, in my research on the World Peace Diet, basically it goes back 10,000 years when we first started owning animals as property for food, and this wealthy elite began controlling, and it was the ranchers from the very beginning. You go back to the Old Testament kings, or the ancient Greek plays, the kings, they controlled the military and the religion and the government, and and they still today. It's gone right through, and it's the same people, the same exact thing. They make the laws. They don't want to. They make the laws in their favor, and they have the money and the power. But we have spirit and truth and love, and that, I think, in the end will for sure win.
Yeah, I think this is a great conversation to be having, looking at these externalized costs, because it's something that we don't hear very much about. And for me as a journalist, I look at this issue as a failure in storytelling. Most people don't live anywhere near farms. I mean, we might live near small farms, people who go to farmers markets. We might have even been to some of these farms, but we don't live anywhere near the agricultural heartland where meat production happens. So in Iowa and areas of North Carolina, Texas, some areas of California, we don't live anywhere near that, so we don't see what happens. We don't live downwind of it to smell the awful smells. We don't live near a stream that's had waste and ammonia runoff feed into it. We've never smelled a hog lagoon. So I think that if there was some way that we could open that up and start to tell more stories, and I mean, people in this audience are probably aware of a lot of the realities of meat production, but most people in this country aren't. And even when I have conversations with my friends, I try and tell them a little bit about factory-raised meat versus more sustainable meat and just different practices. And you throw around numbers and you throw around terms and you talk about it a little bit, but it's really hard to convey it if you haven't seen it, if you haven't been in the slaughterhouses and seen how fast these carcasses come flying through, and the people working there and these awful jobs that they have. If you haven't watched some of the undercover videos, because that's the only way you can get inside the actual barns where the animals are raised. So I think if we could do a better job of telling those stories and getting those stories out there, we need to create the visibility so people understand what really happens on farms with meat production, what those costs are, and how it affects us all, and find ways of giving people that lens into what's really happening.
I understand the concept very well about health insurance because I haven't had very high health insurance bills, and my bills have gone way up in the last 5 or so years. So I don't know what's going on with that, but they seem very, very expensive. And I'm always complaining to anyone who listens that my health insurance costs are really high. So that makes sense that if there are more sick people, the health insurance company has to spend more money on them, and then they got to raise the rates for everyone else. So I understand why sick people is a tax on. And so if you eat a food, smoke cigarettes, or eat animal products, and that causes worse health, that'll raise your health insurance costs. That's very easy to understand. But can you explain how exactly it affects me, other externalities? So the health insurance makes sense. What else specifically translates that I end up having to pay more money for from people eating animal products?
Well, first of all, I mean, I mean, I don't pay health insurance, but basically, all the prices go up. I mean, health insurance we all pay for because companies have to pay, for their employees, and so they just drive the prices up higher for everyone. So, all these costs come back to us. We pay for them through the higher prices of products, as well as, of course, of health insurance. But I think, there's the prices not only of products, but the prices of what we're doing to the planet. I think those are, the fact that we have such inexpensive meat products, dairy products, and eggs show it allows us to be devastating forests and rainforests and oceans. And when that's happening, we have just a lot more natural disasters. For example, we have soil erosion, we have deforestation, we have flooding, we have droughts, we have just more natural disasters are linked to animal agriculture as well. And so I think we have more conflicts. You know, animal agriculture essentially is, as I said in one of my lectures, is trauma. I mean, essentially you're paying workers to do horrible things, to stab animals all day, to rape animals all day, to steal their babies. They go back into their communities. They're violent, they're abusive, they're traumatized. They have what psychologists refer to as perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder. And so they do terrible things in their communities, and those people are traumatized, and they commit more crimes, and that costs all of us more money. If you're just trying to look at the money, I mean, there's more to cost than just what's quantifiable as money. But this whole web of violence, we have more war in the world because we're feeding most of the grain that could feed hungry people, we're feeding it to animals. And so now we have to have a huge weapons industry because we have conflicts breaking out everywhere. And the driving force behind war is inequity, is injustice, and eating meat is unjust. You know, it's basically some people who have more, and I don't think we should use the word developing countries. That acts like we're developed and they're non-developed, like we're superior to them. They're not undeveloped, they're not developing, they're non-industrial, maybe they're less industrialized, maybe they're less toxic and polluted, or maybe they're more toxic and polluted because we basically externalize our costs onto them. We do the mining in less industrialized nations, and we call them undeveloped, like we're the superior, entitled ones in our developed nations to use, and we're trying to help. We're giving them money so they can become like us, like we're the big brothers. But actually, these are industries and financial institutions that are based on nothing but exploitation and domination and oppression and destroying ecosystems and people's lives and making a lot of money on it, and basically allowing large-scale pharmaceutical industries to come in after we sicken the people with meat, dairy products, and eggs, and selling them drugs, and making them enslaved to all of that. So the cost of this are inconceivable. I mean, when you think about living on a planet that's abundant and beautiful, where people are healthy and free, where we're not being lied to by the media, and we're in a situation where we're at each other's throats competing, and we have these gigantic box chain stores and junk food stores that our poor children are being drugged, and they're being targeted by these corporations, foods that are highly toxic. I mean, how do you put a price tag on their happiness, on their sanity? Kids being driven into suicide. How do you put a price on that? And where women are being targeted sexually and being oppressed. This is all based on animal agriculture. When you have a mentality of domination and oppression of female animals, of raping them by the millions and stealing their babies, and it's just as bad on small farms. It's no better. There's no difference. It's still owning and raping and killing animals. And you go into slaughterhouses. Small-scale slaughterhouses are just as cruel or crueler than large-scale slaughterhouses. Factory farming is no worse than small-scale farming. I mean, it's big, it's huge, it's devastating, but when you have small-scale, you have people doing the same horrible things to animals, and you have devastating environmental effects as well. So I think the answers are quite clear when we look at the eternal truths that underlying true abundance, which is available to us on this earth, is living in harmony with nature and with each other and with the other life forms. That's, we can do that. And the cost that we create, that we experience, really, I think we don't realize the price we're paying. We are paying a price that we're so oppressed, we don't realize it. We don't realize how heavy it is to be living in a culture that's acting like this, and how heavy it is on our children to have to be born into a world like this, where already they're targeted. This is huge. How can we say, $400 billion, that's a lot, but that's just skimming the surface of what it really costs us. And I think we have to wake up and realize that we're being exploited, by this whole system, essentially.
Sometimes he just riffs. It's amazing.
How he really feels.
I'll offer a couple of observations as well. I agree with what Will said earlier, and that is that it's difficult to, even though there's a number like $400 billion, we don't really know what the real costs are. That's a number that an economist would say meets the requirements of classical economics. But the number could be 5 trillion, it could be 0, or there might not even be a number, because how do you value somebody's life? But I do think that sometimes having an objective number can be useful, because at least it helps us to put something in perspective. If we know that one number is $10 and one number is $400 billion, then at least we know that there's a difference in magnitude. And one of the calculations that I do is the healthcare costs associated with animal consumption, consuming animal foods. I find that that's a little over $300 billion. And back to Steve's question about how that affects our insurance, there are lots of different kinds of insurance in this country. There are private insurance carriers like Blue Cross, Blue Shield, some of you may have, Aetna. There's Medicare, there's Medicaid. There are alternatives to Medicare like Medicare Advantage. You may or may not know this, but if you pay taxes in this country and or pay insurance premiums, you are subsidizing people across a wide range of health and age demographics. So I have, from my paycheck, deducted payments for Medicaid and Medicare, as many of you do if you get a paycheck or if you pay taxes. So I'm paying to provide health care to people much older than I am, and in some cases that's Medicare, and in some cases to people who are in different socioeconomic groups from I am, from me, and that's Medicaid. I also pay an insurance premium, and I don't even know what that is. Let's say it's $600 a month. But like Will, I don't go to the doctor very often, so I'm also paying to subsidize people who are less healthy than I am. So we are paying to subsidize people in various different demographics. Some of it I think is appropriate. And so, for example, Medicare it's an important social institution. It's been around for a long time. I hope it's there when I'm old enough to take advantage of it. And I hope that there are people getting taxes deducted from their wages to pay for me. Some of it we might think is inappropriate. And Steve's concern is genuine, that if you're healthy and, for example, you don't smoke, you don't eat animal products, you exercise regularly, is it appropriate for you to pay an insurance premium that is essentially subsidizing somebody else who has terrible dietary and exercise habits? Arguably no, but at this point, that's the way insurance works in this country. There's no discount for being on a plant-based diet, although arguably there should be.
One quick little point too, thanks, is you're probably aware of Kaiser, Permanente in California, and how in March of 2013 they finally came out with this long study that they did that took really quite a few years, and they looked in depth at food and what they're feeding their patients in the many and Kaiser's gigantic. It's the largest HMO in the country. They have thousands, I think 10 or 20 something thousand doctors and tens of thousands of nurses and so forth. Anyway, they in this report, which is fascinating to read, I really recommend if you have a chance to just Google that and read it. The bottom line, the statement is that Kaiser recommends, it doesn't recommend, Kaiser mandates that all physicians, all nurses, all health practitioners within the Kaiser system, which is enormous, for all maladies, for all diseases, for all problems that people are having, a whole foods plant-based diet has to be absolutely recommended for everything. It has to be a whole foods plant-based diet. And to me, this is really showing the difference in the way we do healthcare. For example, the typical for-profit hospitals, when someone comes in with cancer, it's like, oh wow, here we got $500,000 right here, And if someone comes in with heart disease, well, this will be at least $350,000 or $400,000 or whatever it is. This is how they make their money. And John McDougall talks about this when he was an MD in Hawaii in Honolulu, and he started to make the connections between how people's diet and their health were connected, and he started to actually recommend to his patients that they eat less meat. That he was called before his supervisor at the hospital, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, you know, it's great. I found out that when my patients eat less meat, I don't have to do the operations. I mean, they get healthy. I don't have to give the drugs. It just heals them." And he said, "You do that anymore, and you're out of here. That's absolutely not an option. You do not do that." And he was really shaken up by that, and so he went on, of course, to create his own clinic. But this is what's going on. This is the basic model. We have to be obvious. This is very obvious. That, you know, this whole system is huge, and the financial institutions in the background have made the loans to build this massive infrastructure of hospitals and cancer centers and all this stuff. There's a huge amount of money invested in all of this, invested in gigantic pharmaceutical industries. The big banks in the background demand a reliable flood of sick people to pay everything off and keep everything going. That's what has to happen. And so the way forward, obviously, is, again, for us to wake up and say, well, I'm not going to be part of that vast, reliable flood of sick people. That's just basically going into the jaws of an unending killing machine, basically, of corruption and violence and destruction, and live in another way. Live in a way that is respectful of our own systems, of animals, of future generations, and of ecosystems, because we can do that. We can actually question all of the advertising. We're just bombarded with ads, with messages coming from our doctors and coming from the media, from the government, from the FDA, from everywhere, really. And that's why I love this. It's about us empowering each other on the grassroots level, just asking these questions and making the connections. And to me, it's enormously positive to see this kind of a movement growing in our society. It's fantastic.
I'll just add my 2 cents about plant-based diets. There's no question that fruits and vegetables, legumes, whole grains are the healthiest thing that we can eat. All Americans need to eat more of them, and need to eat less meat from a health point of view. And then that relates to all the external costs we've been talking about. But it's important to make the distinction. You can actually eat plants and also eat very unhealthy. So I think it's just important to distinguish between processed and unprocessed. So you could be a vegetarian, have a plant-based diet, eat lots of white pasta and bread and sweets, and those would all be plant-based, but very, very unhealthy. The two, I think, as far as health costs and the externalities associated with our diet related to health costs are huge. I mean, insurance premiums have gone up to 200% since 1999, and about 80% of all of our healthcare spending comes from chronic diseases that are related to lifestyle choices. And the biggest lifestyle choice component of that is our diet. So the two biggest components of our diet that I think are causing that are sugar and refined grains. And you can make an argument that processed meat is probably really high up there as well. So, but I think it's just important to, when we talk about plant-based diets, I'm sure you're not referring to Pop-Tarts, right? And white pasta. It's talking about the more unprocessed, nourishing stuff that comes from the earth without too much distortion and tinkering by the food industry.
T. Colin Campbell uses the phrase whole food plant-based diet to do what you're saying. So one thing, a lot of people have said to me, oh, this Will Tuttle is really great. I really like him. He's so spiritual and it's really great. I really like him. The thing, though, is his book came out in 2005. So it's not like he's bringing up brand new cutting-edge information. This came out in 2005. It's on Amazon. It got absolutely unbelievable reviews. If you go to Pandora's Lunchbox, Melanie Warner's book, it's got absolutely unbelievable reviews. If you go to Metanomics, everyone loved your books. But the question is, you worked for the New York Times, Melanie. If this stuff is out there, if all these people are like getting it completely for 10 days, they're oohing and eyeing and clapping and being like, this is outrageous, and we're all clear, why don't my newspapers, I live in Long Island, every day I get Newsday, I get the New York Post, I get the New York Times, I get the Wall Street Journal, and how come this stuff that we're talking about, or this whole meatonomics stuff, doesn't seem to be properly represented in the newspapers? Are they resisting it, or they don't believe it, or am I not seeing it? How would you comment on that?
I mean, I can't really defend Newsday and the New York Post, but the New York Times does fantastic reporting on food and agriculture, both in the magazine and in the paper. It's not the dominant thing, so you could miss stuff, or you go months and months without reading anything, because there's obviously a lot of other important things going on in the world. But when I was there, I was writing about the food industry, and mostly the processed food makers, but to some extent agriculture as well, for a couple of years. There was a lot of encouragement to look at the way our food system was broken, and analyze it, and look at the costs, and look at the ramifications to society, as well as to businesses, what the ramifications would be for consumers reacting to a lot of the practices. So, but the reality is that most people in the country don't read the New York Times. Things might filter through when the New York Times does a big story, and then television picks it up. The thing that has the most impact in terms of media is television. Just an example was the pink slime that hit a few years ago. Then suddenly pink slime had been in the food supply for about a decade, and no one ever knew it, no one ever wrote about it. And it was a guy at the New York Times, Michael Moss, that wrote the first story about pink slime, and he got documents from the FDA, and it was or the USDA rather, and it was someone inside the USDA that actually coined the term pink slime. Some people read the article. It had a certain level of awareness, but it wasn't until, I think it was like 2 or 3 years later, that all of us in this room heard about pink slime, and the rest of the country heard about pink slime. And that was because some woman in Texas started a petition she had read Michael Moss's article after the fact, and she started a petition to get pink slime out of school lunches, and it got a ton of signatures in a really short amount of time, and ABC News picked up on it. So it's not until something hits the television and the television news that most Americans know about it and pay attention to it. And as we know, TV news they're not exactly going in there doing long-form, hard-hitting investigations. It's a lot of short stuff and sound bites, and they tend to follow what other people do. So I think that's part of the media issue.
Well, and I would also mention that your question sort of asks a question about the publishing industry. In this country, there are 300,000 books released by publishing houses every year. But if you include self-published books, the number jumps to 3 million. So there are 3 million new books published in this country every year. So there's a lot of competition. And that's on top of all this social media, Twitter and Facebook and blogs, and people have a ton of content. So we're competing with people, with all that other content for eyeballs. And you never know how and when somebody is going to pay attention to your book.
And also, I think it's important to remember that the mass media is still what most people are tuned into, and it's controlled by maybe 4 large, gigantic corporations. And these gigantic corporations that have kind of bought up each other over the last 20 years control most of the TV and print media, and a lot of the film. A lot of the stuff comes through film too. That's devastating. And the meat and dairy egg industry and the pharmaceutical industry have enormous financial resources. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, but I was raised in a newspaper family, and I learned early on from my father, who ran a chain of 13 newspapers in the Boston area that was eventually actually bought out by the New York Times after I didn't take it over. And but that you don't run news that is going to make your advertisers angry with you. This is an unwritten law. I mean, there's really, I think, fundamentally a huge power that large-scale money has in the media. And I remember when I was in Taiwan, it was very interesting because I was there about a year ago. And that's a country that does not do a lot of animal agriculture. You know, it's a small island, and they don't have a lot of land. They have a lot of mountains, and they have a little bit of area around, and they have a lot of people living there also. So they don't do much animal agriculture. So I was able to actually have a press meeting with the top people in the Taiwanese government, the former Prime Minister of Taiwan, the Senate Whip of Taiwan, and these are the top people in the government of Taiwan, and we could have a press meeting with you know, all the newspapers, the radio, the TV, they were all there. This was national news where we talked about the devastating impacts of meat and dairy industry. You could never do that here. Can you imagine? That's impossible to conceive. Why? Because the meat and dairy industry would never allow that. They would never happen. But in Taiwan, since they didn't, it was like, wow, this is fabulous. You know, there's no meat and dairy industry. You can just kind of get up there. We could talk about, we could have, you know, the former prime minister and the Senate whip saying, yeah, you know, we should really make sure that we have school lunches where the kids are eating plant-based meals. We should have a tax on meat. You know, we should really, it's so devastating to our health and to our economy. It costs so much money. It's not in our best interest. We should really do something, you know. And they were talking about that on national TV. It got play all over the country. And I remember, you know, coming back here. Actually, from there I went to Australia and New Zealand. It was just the exact opposite there, where, you know, again, it was like being here, where the whole question was, well, you know, what would the industry say? You can't do that. You know, we make all our money. This is how we make our money, is from meat and dairy. And so I think, you know, I would say to them, look, if you have an industry that's absolutely devastating. Like you, for example, if the industry, instead of being meat and dairy, if it was making weapons, right, it was making bombs and mines, and you just hope that nobody ever shoots those nuclear weapons and hopes that nobody ever steps on those mines you're putting everywhere. But that's how we make all our money, though. And so if someone came along and said, well, I think we should have peace. What do you mean, peace? You're going to destroy our economy if you have peace. We're a war-based economy. We've got to have some war, otherwise it's bad. It's the same thing with the meat and dairy industry, you know. And actually we are, and with, at least with bombs, you're hoping you don't use it. With meat and dairy, you actually are using it. You actually are killing the animals. You actually are destroying everything as you're doing it, and devastating every dimension of society. And I think the meat and dairy industry have pretty much a huge control, and the pharmaceutical industry over our media. And it's great, I think, that we can have Twitter and Facebook and so forth. But from my point of view, there is an enormous amount of pressure. I mean, there are people, I've seen this on Facebook. There are the pharmaceutical industry and a lot of these other industries pay people to get on there and to write comments on articles. And someone, you know, I've seen this. You write an article talking about the devastating impacts of GMOs or of meat and dairy, and there's paid people. They're paying a lot of people to write comments against those articles and to. You know, this is what we're up against. When you have a lot of money, you have the capacity to influence opinion. You can just blast a message everywhere. There's no way you can escape. And the mass media is, from the point of view of vegan living, has not been our friend. I think it's moving in that direction just because it's becoming more and more obvious that this is the way we have to go. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. But I think we the people have to be very savvy about this and be very aware. I just saw, just the other day, 2 days ago, there was this guy from Stanford, the study from Stanford saying the way we could solve the problem with California's water crisis is by banning organic foods. And you know, researchers from Stanford University have done a study, and it's, you know, they're paid off by they're Monsanto shills, you know, basically, and this is blasted all over Fox News, you know, that it's organic agriculture in California that is destroying. That's why we have a water shortage. You know, this is the kind of stuff that the media is blasting out to the millions, and we may not be aware of that, but that's what's going on. I think it's important to be aware of that.
So what is the solution to get these externalities to be taken into account?
Well, externalities generally exist because corporations have a legal objective, and that is to make money. You can't blame a corporation for trying to make money. I mean, you can criticize it for how it does it, but if a corporation acts within the bounds of the law, it exists as an entity with that as its purpose. So you can't say, hey, stop trying to make money, because the response is, well, I'm a corporation, that's what I do, I make money. When the law allows a corporation to externalize its costs, the corporation will do so. And you cannot blame the corporation for doing that. You can't say, bad corporation, you externalized a bunch of costs, don't ever do that again, because it's completely legal. Now, if they're doing something that's illegal, if they're dumping toxic waste in the desert or in a lagoon, that's illegal. But what we're talking about here is legal externalization of costs. Why is it legal? It's legal because at the state and federal level, our lawmakers for decades have enacted laws that protect the factory farms and the animal agricultural industry in this country. I talked about many of these in my presentation today, but there are things like ag laws, cheeseburger laws, food defamation laws, customary farming exemptions, animal and ecological terrorism laws. These are laws that in the aggregate number in the hundreds. And what they allow corporations to do is to legally externalize their costs. So, if we want to stop corporations from externalizing their costs, we have to change the laws that allow them to do that. There's no other way to do it other than to change the basic structure of capitalism and say, look, we're done with this capitalism thing. There's going to be no more corporations and no one's going to be able to make money. That's not going to happen in this country. But we can certainly address the laws that allow corporations to do these things.
Yeah, that's been the battle, and actually, corporations never sleep in doing what they can do to subvert the legal process. I don't know how many of you are aware of the TPP, right? The Trans-Pacific Partnership. Michelle was talking about trumping, how national laws can, if you pass something on the local, they'll try to pass something on the state to trump the local law, or they'll try to pass something on the national level to trump the state law. Well, now we have the TPP, which basically trumps all nations' laws. And it's a secret bill. I don't have to explain it. I don't think you know what it is. It's a secret trade agreement that the senators are not even allowed to speak about it, and we're not allowed to know what it is. But they're supposed to. Obama has said, we have to fast track this and pass this, and it sets up basically an international judiciary that is appointed by a committee of corporations. And they can they can make their own regulations that completely make null and void any national, state, or local regulations protecting animals or environment or workers or societies or anything. They can say that's an interference of commerce, and you can't do that. Like GATT, very similar to GATT. This is the situation we're having, and I write about it in the World Peace Diet. Essentially, corporations are a manifestation of animal agriculture. We have to understand the mentality of underlying animal agriculture is entitlement. It's we are superior, we are entitled, and we are going to not take responsibility for the results of our actions. We do not have to take responsibility because we are entitled. And so it was only a matter of time before, as the thousands of years went by of animal agriculture, that we had the arising of power blocks that would create legal structures to absolve themselves of responsibility and create themselves as legal persons. I mean, we're trying right now, as you're probably aware, to try to get chimpanzees to get legal personhood. So they'll be seen as beings who are deserving of having their rights protected. You can't just put them in a wire cage because you want to, that they have rights. And as Stephen Wise has argued, he's a great lawyer working on this. And corporations have legal rights. They can sue. They're literally beings, and yet non-human animals who obviously have can really suffer have not been given those rights. So again, this is all a manifestation of animal agriculture. And I think, again, what we need is a massive change. I mean, we need to have much bigger change than what we're talking about here, and I think it is going to happen, because we can't continue on this path of allowing this kind of a system to exist. And the foundation of that is us at a grassroots level going vegan. Because if you don't go vegan, then what? I mean, we're just part of that system, essentially. So.
Melanie, I'd like to just ask you again, if the media, if TV is the ultimate media that really influences people, how do, whatever the issue is, if there is something important that's been discussed, how do you get it so that the TV stations will talk about it or will publicize it? Is that possible, or are we saying that they're influenced too much by industry? Or is there a way, if there are real issues that we're talking about that are meaningful, how would you get those onto national TV?
Well, I mean, I think there are certain stories that are compelling to TV more so than others. Like the pink slime example is something that they knew people would react to. It was a huge ick factor. It was just gross, ammonia-treated beef that nobody knew was in our hamburgers. And it's like people they knew there would be people who would have a visceral reaction and a very personal reaction, especially if they worried that their kids were eating it in school lunch, which some of them were. I think that trying to talk about animal welfare and the concern of animals and the well-being of animals is much harder. It's a much harder sell, because you have to get people to care about that. And you have to get people to go beyond themselves and just beyond their health, and to understand the ways in which the well-being of animals is somehow connected to all of us and connected to them indirectly, but very much connected. So I think it's a harder sell, and you have to find a way that the story is going to resonate with people. Like, why are people going to care about this story? How do we make them care about it? And I think it's something that people in this movement maybe haven't talked about enough to try and figure out how to make people connect with that if they're already not in touch with that. I mean, I think if you took kids on field trips to pork production facilities, for instance, that would be a great way. You could take adults too, to get them to care about it personally. But no pork producer, factory farm confined pork producer is going to let you do that. So short of that, you can get them to watch videos, but and some of those videos, like the Mercy for Animal videos in the Humane Society, those do make it into the media, but they don't become the sensation that something like Pink Slime did.
Okay, if you would like to ask a question of Melanie, Will, and David, you can raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone.
Maybe for the next question, I'll just say, I also think that besides showing people the cruelty of animal production and so forth, another thing that we could do would be enormously transformational, I think, in a positive way, would be to teach kids how to garden, and how to grow their own food, how to prepare their food, and how to really, I think I've seen this in some schools that have had garden projects, because when kids see vegetables in the store, they think that doesn't look very good, or when they eat them. But I think when kids grow their own vegetables and are part of the process, and I think all of us actually, I mean, I personally, we lived in an RV for 17 years up until recently, and now we have created, over the last 2 years, a food forest and planted lots of fruit trees and berries and herbs and vegetables and all these things. And there's just this fabulous sense of creating a whole environment where birds and butterflies and beneficial insects and it's just this kind of like a little paradise. And out of that comes all this food, and it's just pouring out, and that we can live on this. We can really live. It was so interesting. I know not everyone lives in Maui, but I was in Maui not too long ago giving a day-long workshop at a retreat center, and the fellow who owns the land there talked about how he gave this short talk, and he said, "What you're looking at when you look at me, my body is fueled about 33% by my breadfruit tree." He said, "When I first moved onto this land, I planted a breadfruit tree, a tiny little sprout, and I watered it and I nurtured it, and it grew and it grew and it grew, and now it's this huge tree. And most breadfruit trees only give out their fruit once a year. This gives out fruit twice a year. Basically, the entire year, it's always fruiting. And I've learned how to, breadfruit is something you have to cook. So, I know how to fry it, how to bake it, how to boil it, how to steam it. I love breadfruit. I love my breadfruit tree. I eat every single day from my breadfruit tree. And my breadfruit tree every single day is feeding me, and I'm feeding it, and I'm giving her all my energy, and I'm helping her." And he said, this is how I live, is from this breadfruit tree. And I realized, just listening to him, how some people, when they say, eating meat, it's part of the natural cycle. It's sort of life feeding on life. And I thought, no, this is life feeding on life. This is how, this is really life. That's life feeding on death. This is life feeding on life. Really loving the land, loving the plants, giving them our love, and how he said this tree just loves him. He can feel it, and he communicates, and he has the sense of being nurtured, not just physically, but on many other levels as well. And I think this kind of a thing, helping us to reconnect with the earth and with the miracle of growing our own food, and the beauty of the possibility we have as human beings to create a society with a different foundation that's based on honoring Sophia, the sacred feminine, which yearns to nurture life, is something we can all do on some level. We can all contribute to that in some way. And I think this is, instead of fighting against corporations, just create an alternative. Do our own thing, make local CSAs and so forth, and just create alternative currencies, create alternative everything. That's what we need to do, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question, and I have a thought. Steve was talking about media, and this is a question for the audience or anybody out there who has some ideas. I had a business inside Whole Foods Market in 1988, I guess, when I met Ann Wigmore, who mentored me. And I used to do classes inside the store and prepare sprouting and energy soup and all kinds of different things. And I guess that was kind of interesting because I was sitting there almost on the floor playing with people's feet, doing reflexology. And the media picked us up because, a lot of people come into Whole Foods. That's when they used to do juices and everything was organic and, those times. So the media picked us up. And all of a sudden, there were other medias that were picking us up. We even had people from Brazil come over and flew us to New York and all this other stuff. The point was that I got on television many times, like maybe 7 or 8 times, USA Today, all this other stuff, I think because I was doing something unique. I was playing with people's feet. And people didn't know what reflexology was. But then I was introducing living foods. And now I'm going, because I'm in a different phase of that same conversation, I'm going back to the media that promoted me, or the channels that promoted me, saying, she's back. And this is what I'm doing. So my question is, of anybody, given that my commitment is children, what are you guys doing that is specific to educating children? And you touched on it, because I'm creating a children's garden where it's going to be an after school so the community can come and learn how to farm, how to create permaculture, how to sprout, how to germinate, how to ferment. And I find that when you work with the children, then the children teach the parents. So whenever I do a class, you have to bring a child. You have to borrow one if you don't have one, so that children support me. They're my assistants. And they teach the parents, right? They go home and they teach the parents. So because children are my future, and I have a 50-year mission that 50 years from now, our children today, or the ones coming in, will be born into a paradise, because I said so. And I'm enrolling people to really take that on. You know, Helen said, I'm voting for her. She's going to be the next president. There's all kinds of stuff going on out there. But the most important thing is to take care of ourselves and to take care and nurture those children. So the question is, who knows how to take the most important piece of our children, which is education and school and what they're eating, to bring that message to the media so that the media can pick it up and say, wow, there's something happening here. Maybe because they're curious. I don't know, they were curious about something in the past. But what could they be curious about today that has to do with those children? Can any of you address that?
I mean, I would just say, you know, we don't have to necessarily anymore, which is one of the beauties of the internet, you know, rely on the major media either. You know, you can get something to go viral on YouTube just because people love it. And I think that you can reach millions of people with beautiful ideas if you can you know, just get them out there. And so I think it's more and more, hopefully, if we can keep the internet democratized, we can empower each other by creating videos of I think video, you know, creating videos of this, and that helps to plant the seed, because when people see something like that, it can build an energy of excitement, you know. But that's just one idea. Maybe other people have ideas.
The dairy industry spends $50 million every year promoting dairy to children in schools. They're in 70,000 schools. I mean, you almost can't walk through a public school in this country without seeing messages promoting milk, posters, and other you know, pamphlets and literature. If dairy weren't considered such a sort of a normal thing to consume in this country, that would be shocking to people. If some of the clinical research that shows that dairy is actually harmful to children were made more widely available, that would be shocking to people. You know, there are studies that show that children who consume a lot of dairy reach puberty sooner, they reach menarche sooner, they may have higher elevated risk for breast cancer and other forms of cancer. This is really shocking stuff. Nobody seems to care about it much because the conventional wisdom is that, well, dairy is just something that we've always consumed and we always will consume, and you need dairy for healthy bodies. But you know, if people could be made to understand that dairy isn't really the thing for their kids, then they would be shocked by the fact that all this money is being spent to promote it to their children. And that might be a media issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to get those messages out of the schools. I mean, there's no place. I mean, the schools in our town. I live in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado. It's a fairly progressive community, and I've never seen any dairy ads or any commercial stuff in the schools. But I think that's atypical. There are still schools that have box top, or you're supposed to take the tops of processed food, and then you get money for your school. There's pizza companies that come into schools, and it's just not the right place for marketing, particularly for unhealthy foods. I think that there is interesting things going on elsewhere in the UK recently. Jamie Oliver, if you guys watched, he had a show on here. He's a famous British chef. He was on for a few seasons here in the US, and he's been at the forefront of this in the UK, and he and his organization and others have actually gotten cooking classes implemented in all the schools in the UK, so that kids are learning just basic, fun, simple cooking skills, how to work with fresh food. They teach where food comes from. And I think it's so important to start with kids, because if you can get kids thinking differently about food, or if you can get them just thinking that real food is real food, and they don't think that eating frozen pizza and soda and Taco Bell for dinner is a normal thing. If they understand really what food is and the role that it's supposed to play in our lives, then you can change. I mean, that's the way to change the world. If you change the way kids think, and kids at an early age, I know from having my own kids up until I mean, from what people tell me, it's age 12 they start thinking you're an idiot. Up until that point, they believe everything you say. So you kind of have this window to influence them and to open their mind up and change the programming that they might be getting from society at large and from marketing messages too.
Hi, I want to make a comment about your information, Will. Very profound. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, a very esteemed university in Europe, mathematically calculated after reviewing 37 million companies and 47,000 transnational corporations that indeed less than 1% of the world controls the world, and lo and behold, they're the banks. Now, I know you said 4 corporations control the media. I think it's 6, but indeed they are owned by the banks, with the kingpin bank being the Vatican Bank. Now, the fact that you enlightened us yesterday and today that Pecos, which means cow, created pecuniary, chattel, the etymology of which is cattle. I think you also mentioned that Gavia, a Sanskrit word, is connected to war and to have many cows. And then you basically offline talked about the denarius, de meaning 10, and denarius being a Roman coin to have 10 cows. And then through your comparative religion studies, you also enlightened us on the fact that the kings were really the ranchers that controlled the cows, and now the military and the religion and the government. I think from a very deep spiritual perspective, we absolutely should stop eating meat. The sacred feminine that you talk about and the way things are abused and the complete parallel of what we see in society. I'm just really grateful to you for bringing this extreme awareness, but I wanted to make the parallel with the banks, the money changers, the kings, the ranchers of the cattle from that 10,000 years ago, and how that oppression can be lifted by us just saying no to the cows and the meat and becoming vegan. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's important to remember when someone says they're a farmer, to say, well, what kind of farmer? Because farmer can be either animal or plant, right? And from the very beginning, animal agriculture was men's work, and it brought out the worst in people. Always brought out the very worst in people, and it was about. And the animals were always resisting, right? They were always. And from the very beginning, when you look at plant agriculture, from the very beginning, it was women's work, basically, and it's working with the miraculous beauty of, the basic fact that you plant one seed and you get 10,000 seeds, right? That you're working with the natural cycles of the seasons and the sun and the moon and so forth, and you're working essentially with something that's cooperative. You plant things and they grow, and you plant a tree and you get thousands of trees, and the trees don't charge you per apple. The trees don't say, well, I'm giving you more figs this year, but you got to pay me or something. No, they're just giving. There's this enormous generosity that's foundational to plant agriculture. There's no more beautiful place we can go than a garden that's bringing forth fruits and vegetables and berries and herbs and things. And you think of the most absolute horrific hell realm on planet Earth, it's animal agriculture. There's nothing uglier. It smells bad, it looks bad, it's toxic, it's violent, it's unbelievably horrific. And to think we would actually take products from that and feed that to our children, that we would feed this terror and fear and pain and despair that's based on not just humans dominating animals, but on men dominating female animals. We have to really understand that animal agriculture is based on profoundly domination of the feminine. You could not have animal agriculture without the complete domination of female animals and stealing their babies and raping them against their will and over and over and over again. That's utter sexual violence. All animal agriculture, backyard animal agriculture to factory farm, it's all the same. It's all based on the domination of female animals brutally, and feeding that to our children. And how do we expect to have a society of justice but between the genders, or any kind of justice and equality in our relationships with each other, or respect for each other, when we're living in a way of massive disrespect. And so I think underlying all this is realization that if I take out my wallet and pay for the flesh or secretions of tortured, enslaved female animals, I'm actually putting money into a system that is making all of us very unfree. It's actually, the ancient teaching is whatever you sow, you will reap. If we want to enslave animals, all right, but when you do that, you become yourself, you lose your own freedom. And we have allowed a system to evolve through corporations. That's really how it is, in large financial institutions that in many ways have us under their thumb, in the sense that we're working and most of the money is going not for our benefit. We're not getting it back. It's going other places. And we can see this, I think, if we're paying attention. I mean, we're relatively privileged. If we're sitting here, we're relatively privileged. But essentially, this is the situation here. So we must question animal agriculture. That is where it gets its claws into us, is through getting us to eat this stuff, to pay for this actually, and feed it to our children. And we can realize that we don't have to fight against the system. We can actually realize that this system has evolved for whatever reason, and we can withhold our support from it, and then give our support to alternatives, to the beautiful alternatives that are ever present. I mean, there's infinite possibilities of incredibly beautiful projects that we can embark on together, of films and music and art and gardening and speaking and teaching. This is Steve created this. I mean, 10 days of people talking about these things, and who knows what seeds this will plant, right? And we can, each one of us, go forth from here and plant our own seeds, and that'll inspire other people to plant more seeds. And that's really, I think, we're on this planet for a few years. Let's do something to help this poor, in a sense, beautiful planet in the middle of outer space. We've come here, and we've been able to awaken enough from the cultural trance to see that we can contribute something of benefit. And I think that's in the most inspiring and beautiful thing we can do. So thank you for pointing that out.
I want to thank you, like everyone else here, just for this profound conference. We're all benefiting. I can't help but think that our animal companions that live with us, that sleep with us, that there's something there. There is a connection there. It's almost like homeopathy. It's like the solution could be in the, shall we say, disease. And how many households have animal companions? More so than even children. Many people that don't have children have animal companions. And so there's a connection there. I haven't made it yet. I'm going to contemplate it. But I really feel that somehow these creatures have come to us to help us heal the planet. And being creatures themselves, they have some secrets that our love for them will release to us. I see it with my own companions, and I hear them. There's so for all of us that have animal companions, this is a really important relationship for our planet. And I had mentioned this yesterday, Will, if you could speak on even their diet. Their diets are, some of them are carnivores. At least we've been told they're carnivores. So we have to feed them meat. So could you talk a little bit about that and about the other things that I've brought up?
Just briefly, I think part of the reason we see ourselves as carnivores is because we live in a society where not only are we eating it, we're forced from the time we're little children to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs, but we have the two main companion animals we have are carnivorous, right? And we very much identify with our dogs and cats. Well, my dog's like me, and my cat's like me, and so I must be a carnivore too, because the dog and the cat, they're carnivores, so I must be one too. If we weren't raised in a society, and dogs and cats were basically brought into a herding society in order to help the herders, right? In order to help protect against foxes and other things, in order to kill predators like cats are. So that's part of the whole programming, really, of living in this society. And in this 2 points, I think this is good news in the sense that dogs are easy vegans. I mean, it's not difficult. They're very much naturally omnivorous, and you can make your own food. There's many recipes online with lentils and carrots and other things. You can buy Evolution or V-Dog, or there's a bunch of different types. And cats are a little more difficult, but Evolution makes a vegan cat food, and the founder of that, who's been doing this for like 25 years, told me on the phone a while back that from his research, about 2/3 of all cats will thrive on a vegan diet. So we do have options if we don't want to feed dead animals to our companion animals. But I also want to say that I think that these dogs and cats, perhaps, as they enter our lives, we're teaching them, but I think they're teaching us a lot, and opening our hearts to respect for all life. But I also want to say that I think we should really open up also, if we can, to free living animals, to so-called wild animals. And I don't know how that will happen, for you individually as people, but I have found myself, perhaps it's because I'm a vegan, that when I go out into nature, the animals are not afraid of me. And there's this. I had one experience that was pretty pivotal, I think, for me, when I was living at one point in my life. I lived in a 1971 Volkswagen bus, and I was traveling around the country, and I was up in the Olympic Mountains outside of Seattle, and I left my van, and I went one way up, and I left my van, and I went hiking, and I hiked way the heck up high, and then I went way far down to the stream, to this lake, and took a swim, and then I was trying to make my way back before it got dark, and I had gone way too far. I had no food, I had no water, I got really exhausted. I was hiking in the moonlight, up this hill that went on forever, and I was I didn't think I was going to make it. And I was exhausted, and it was really far. I'd gone, so many miles. And so I was just hoping I could somehow get back to my van, my Volkswagen bus. And I was going along, I was tromping my way up this endless hill, and I was at the absolute limit. I could barely make one more step and barely make another step, and I thought, I'm just going to have to bivouac here, But I wanted to try to get back. And at that moment, suddenly an elk appeared and started walking next to me and just walked beside me. And we walked together. And the elk was like just a couple of yards away. And in the state I was in, because when you're all alone way out in the middle of nowhere, in the moonlight, it's not the same. I was in kind of an altered state, and so I wasn't even surprised. It was like, oh, hello, I'm glad you're here. And he walked along beside me, or she. I felt like it was a he. He walked along beside me, and I just felt my energy coming. I just felt this energy coming, like I could make it, And we walked along together for a while, and then at one point he sort of picked up his pace and kind of ran. Went off in front of me and disappeared into the shadows, and he was gone. But that got me. It was like, all right, And so I kept going, and I made it to the top of the hill. And I looked down. There was my little van. I get down there, and I remember going back down, getting back into my van, and there was lots of food and water and everything else. And I was like, oh wow! But before I ate anything or drank anything, I just sat in that van and I said, thank you to that animal, to that being. And I think the animals love us. They would love us. They would love to live in harmony with us and teach us and be our friends. We are so violent and cruel and disrespectful, and they're just waiting. Can human beings? We are destroying this precious web in these animals, and we say it's for our health, it's for our taste. We have reasons that mean nothing. And so I think our true health will come when we can somehow each one of us vow to live our lives to somehow make a positive difference for beings who are at our mercy. And I think when we do that, our life will come into alignment with a higher purpose, and we'll know what it is to be grateful to be alive and to be happy and to be part of a positive solution on this planet. And I'm so grateful to that elk and to all the other beings who are doing the best they can to hold the space of conscious, aware celebration of life on this beautiful planet. It's definitely possible. I can see it coming. Thank you.
Hi. Do you guys know anything about the Monsanto forcing us to use seeds only one time to plant a crop, and then we won't be able to buy seeds any longer to, turn the crops and do all that good stuff that we used to be able to do in farming? Do any of you have any updates on that?
I mean, that only applies to their genetically modified seeds, which they've been able to patent. So there is a march forward that the biotech companies are trying to get more, startup companies and the established companies are trying to get more and more foods to be approved to be genetically modified. But the good news is that right now, the produce section of your supermarket, there aren't going to be any intentional approved genetically modified foods there. All the crops that have been approved are really just going into animal feed, or they're going into processed foods. There was the potato recently approved, so that could be coming on the market, and that would be in the produce section. But if the way to avoid genetically modified foods are to eat organic. It's a really easy way to do that. But yeah, the seed issue just relates to Monsanto seeds, which is primarily corn and soybeans and canola.
Yeah, that Terminator technology, I think it's really important. Also, actually, I found out just recently, just to be aware, that if something says organic, if it doesn't say 100% organic, it actually could have some GMO in it. So for the packaged foods, right? So, but now there is this new certification that's certified GMO. What's it? The GMO project. And you can look for GMO project labels, and that's a good way to avoid purchasing any of those things. And yeah, it's a real battle to try to stop this kind of takeover of our food supply by the biotech industries, by the big pharmaceutical industries. And I think it's really taking place a lot in India, a lot in sort of so-called less industrialized nations. And I think the more we can just stand up against this. My wife is Swiss. It's very interesting to see how the Swiss, they can't get anywhere in Switzerland because the people there garden, and they just won't, they can't even begin to approve of that. And so I think, again, if we could educate the people here to the level they have been in some of the other countries, then we could definitely put a stop to this. And not just have GMO labeling, we should have GMO banning. We should just ban it. That's really what we should be doing. I think the labeling thing is really a bad idea. We should be banning it like they did in Maui, just not allow them to grow this stuff. It's terribly toxic. Roundup has now been shown to be a carcinogen, and we're really, I think, being much too easy on these corporations.
I was in a march last year against Monsanto's, and I understand 50 cities had the march against Monsanto's. There was a few thousand people in my city, and it's interesting to know that no media anywhere covered it. Nobody covered it. So we can't get anywhere in our movement by depending on the media at all. I just want to mention also, some DVDs that I found very interesting. One of them a few years ago I got, it was eating. I guess we're familiar with eating. I was so impressed with it, I bought 400 copies. Yes, I got it at a cheaper rate at 400 copies. And then there's forks over knives. But just recently, I saw the most horrific one ever. And if you think there's not cruelty to animals, you might want to watch it. Maybe you're familiar with it. You know what it is? It's called Earthlings. Earthlings, because we are Earthlings and so are the animals. And it scared me. And some people that were watching it said, I don't want to watch anymore. It really is horrible. So people might like to watch that. And one other little thing is, I guess people know too, that fruits and vegetables, if they're organic, they have a sticker on them that starts with 9. And if they're GMOs, they start with 4. 4. So we don't buy anything that starts with a 4.
It's actually just non-organic. It doesn't mean it's GMO if it starts
I
with a
thought
4.
it meant that it was GMO.
No, it doesn't mean it's GMO.
Oh.
It means it's
So
not organic.
Casey is
It's
saying
commercial.
Well, I'm not buying it
starts
anyway.
with 8.
I thought 8 was conventional and 4 was GMO, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm no expert, but I don't buy it unless it's a
7.
9.
Okay.
Okay. So
Yeah,
5.
really, it's very important, I think, to eat non-GMO, whole food, organically grown, plant-based foods. I mean, this is really the bottom line. Don't buy processed food. Just don't buy them. You know, we don't buy. I mean, I think the only processed food we buy is Vegenaise. But I think other than that, it's just fruits and grains, and that's it. And I think and vegetables, and grow as much of it as you can yourself, or at least buy from local people. Really, I think it's important to have a strong line on that, and it's just fabulous. It's a great foundation for health. And it's a great way to support people who are doing agriculture that's in alignment with our values. We should support those people. And I think it's really important not to support corporations that don't have our values at all. Just don't support them. Don't give them any money.
we're going to close. Would you like to make any closing thoughts? Any closing thoughts anyone has?
I'll just make one comment. I feel a little odd woman out here because I do consume meat. I eat very limited quantities, and I pay a higher price for it, and I always seek out more sustainably raised. But I'm starting to rethink because of Will's. I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting for me is that Will and I are completely ideologically aligned, but we express our position completely differently. And I want to be more like Will, but I'm a corporate lawyer, so I've got that working against me. But just as Will advocates for veganism as a solution to this problem, and the problem that we're talking about on this panel is the externalization of costs. Of course, I agree with that, and I want to provide you this example because it is a little challenging to go vegan, but only in the way that it's challenging to learn how to drive a car or to learn how to ride a bicycle. And when I went vegan, it was a little difficult for a couple of months to figure out what to eat. But it's a little difficult when you first start driving a car because you got to check your mirrors all the time, and you got this little checklist in your head like, okay, seatbelt, mirror, ship, locked door. But after you've been driving for 6 months or a year or a couple of years, that's completely second nature. You don't even think about it anymore. And nobody who has been vegan for any period of time beyond a few months thinks about it at all. It never, ever seems to be hard again after the initial transition. When the only reason it's hard, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, dairy contains opiates. It's designed to bring calves back to the udder so that they'll drink milk. So dairy is addictive. It's a little hard to wean yourselves off dairy because there's this small amount of opiates in them. But it's also kind of hard to figure out what to eat. When you've been eating, in my case, bacon double cheeseburgers and basically crap right up until the day you go vegan, it's a little difficult to decide what to eat on day 0 of being vegan. But it really is like learning how to drive a car or ride a bicycle. Once you figure it out, you're done, and you never think about it again. You never worry, gee, am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough calcium? Because you just get it. Because when you eat plants, you just get the nutrients that you need, and you don't worry about it. It isn't difficult. And And it bothers me to hear that objection raised so often, like, boy, it's really hard to be vegan, isn't it? And the answer is it hard to drive a car? Oh, that's...
Thank you. Maybe I'll just say that I really hope that Dave doesn't feel like he has to change at all. Give a hand to Dave. Don't you? You need people like you with your amazing clarity and the capacity you have to. He organized this campaign to have a billboard right on the 405 in LA that's to go vegan, right? What's it say on there or something? It's great, yeah. It shows.
There's an image of there are a couple of them, but one of them is an image of a guy eating a hot dog, and above it says "a moment of pleasure," and right next to it is an image of pigs in hyper-confinement, and above that it says "a lifetime of pain," and the bottom it says in big red letters "Go vegan." And it's getting like 8 million impressions a month.
How many?
8 million.
8 million impressions a month. Anyway, So Dave, no, don't change. It's really an honor to be on this panel with these wonderful people, and with all of you. I think I've already said plenty, so I won't say anything more. But I just know that we are part of a gathering wave of momentum. Of awareness, of love. That's really what veganism is. It's just living a life as much as we can of caring and love and inclusion. It's this kind of radical inclusion where I say I'm going to include all living beings within the sphere of my kindness and compassion and live my values. And as we do that, we create a space around us, I think, naturally, of freedom that naturally encourages others to question the official stories of our society that cause so much violence and devastation. And that by doing that together, we create a field that's growing even larger. And I love the fact that we have this all on video in the sense that it can go and be able to be viewed by other people as well. And so let's just go forth. It sounds funny to say, go forth and multiply, but I mean, go forth and multiply the message and be part of this transformation. Much love to you, everyone. Thank you very much for being part of this.